think I'm allowed to say Merry Christmas, right? Merry Christmas. I want to read the verses first, and then we'll get right into the word. Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. And if somebody can also help me out with my PowerPoint, awesome. Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Amen. Christmas is right around the corner. Pretty soon, most of the songs on the radio are going to be about the 12 days of Christmas and what we want. Husbands out there, I think we've already started the Christmas wish and list, right, to check it off for our wives and for maybe our children, getting prepared. I see a lot of husbands saying, no, you're in big trouble, you better start. See, Christmas is a time when we give each other gifts. And my message tonight for you is Jesus, the perfect gift for humanity. And I want to look at a little bit, not about these gifts we just give to one another, but on a global perspective, at the perspective of all humanity that ever existed, past, present, future. And see, what is the gift of Jesus mean to humanity? It's something big. It's something very big. And as we get into it, you will start to see that as you try to wrap around your brain around this whole concept of Jesus, the perfect gift for humanity, it comes with some very deep implications. First, Isaiah presents to us many different prophecies, but this prophecy hits it home for humanity. And if you want to move to the next slide, please. The very first thing that Isaiah said, it says that his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor. Wonderful Counselor. Now, the gift that God is giving to us, to all humanity through Jesus Christ, is the gift of wisdom. And you might say, well, George, that just sounds so cheesy. It sounds so simple even. Why would God do such a thing? Well, it begs a very good question, and it's very easy to answer that when you can get outside of your own box. And for us, who we've been living in our Christian box, and maybe some of us, we weren't, Christians before, we didn't grow up in a Christian household, we didn't grow up with Christianese, so we didn't, really miss out on this gift of wisdom that God is giving us. But you might ask yourself, why is this so important? And it's important for this reason. Because God's gift of wisdom to humanity is to overcome, and I apologize for using this rather very harsh word to describe humanity, to overcome our stupidity. God's gift of wisdom to humanity is given in order to overcome our stupidity. And you might say, well, that's pretty harsh, George. How in the world was humanity stupid before Jesus arrived? Well, let's look at what this world looked like, not just before Jesus, but even after Jesus, those civilizations that denied the truth that comes from the framework of a Judeo-Christian worldview. I want us to look at an example today, Africa. 1.3 billion people in Africa. And out of all of the continents in this world, Africa has the highest poverty rate. Why? Why? How do you solve the poverty issue at a level of a continent? See, for us who've grown up in all of this, it's easy to think of Jesus, and it's easy just to maybe take for granted this gift of wisdom. But when you look at the effect of Christianity in Western civilization, you see that it had revolutionized everything. Everything from politics, culture, healthcare, right? You know who started healthcare? The church. And why did the church start healthcare? Because Jesus said so. There were no hospitals before. If you look at all of the hospitals that ever started in Europe, and especially from Western Europe and in America, they started off from Methodist churches, Presbyterian churches, Adventist churches, and most of our healthcare systems started off by being affiliated with a church. Didn't governments exist beforehand? Why didn't governments think of that idea prior to it? Why was it the church interjecting such an application into society? Because it was in fact God's gift of wisdom that he bestowed upon his church, and his church was able to act upon it. I want to come back to Africa, to 1.3 billion people, of which over 300 million people are in poverty. There was an atheist man, a homosexual, who was British, grew up in South Africa, went back in his adult years back to Britain. He became a member of parliament, and looking towards Africa, an atheist homosexual parliamentary man. We all know that these people don't really want to espouse a Christian worldview, let alone promote it. Matthew Paris said this about Africa in an article that he wrote. He says, "As an atheist, I truly believe Africa needs God." And he says, "Those who want Africa to walk tall amidst 21st century global competition must not kid themselves that providing the material means or even the know-how that accompanies what we call development will make the change. A whole belief system must first be supplanted, and I'm afraid it has to be supplanted by another. Removing Christian evangelism from the African equation may leave the continent at the mercy of a malign fusion of Nike, the witch doctor, the mobile phone, and the machete." You're talking about thousands of years of a continent who has not accepted the truth, the gift of wisdom from God through Jesus Christ, has developed into a society that is prone to what we see out there today. We can't even overcome our own ignorance as humanity without the revealed truth of Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus made a very bold claim. He says that you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. We as human beings are enslaved even at this level of ignorance when we do not respond to the wisdom that comes from Jesus. And we see that God himself, through Isaiah, prophesies, and he says, "And his name shall be called a wonderful counselor." What an amazing gift. Second of all, Isaiah calls him the mighty God. And this is the gift of strength. Strength for what? We are incapable to deal with our own human depravity. Mighty God, God is coming, giving us this gift through Jesus to overcome our own depravity. This is kind of like a four-letter word to people in the world, but it's only a 3-letter word in reality. It's called sin. Sin. Nobody wants to hear this word or touch it from outside. They want to live in their own bubble. No. Human beings, we're good people. We mean well. It's just, the sociological factors that make us who we are. It's all nurture, not nature, right? How do we overcome our own depravity? Malcolm Muggeridge, an atheist CNN reporter back in the 70s, gave his life to the Lord, and he wrote this in one of his books. He says, "The depravity of man is at once the most empirically verifiable fact, even as it is the most intellectually resisted." Why is it intellectually resisted by this world? Because if there's a problem with us, that means we got to find a solution. And that solution will always point right back to a transcendent being. We are not strong enough to lift ourselves up by the proverbial bootstraps. And so Jesus, coming into this world, is helping us to overcome our own depravity, our sin. Romans 6:13-14 says, "And do not present your members as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourselves to God as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under the law, but under grace." The grace that comes through Jesus is now breaking the shackles off of us. And we are able to overcome our human depravity of sin. Sin which leads to death. And the Apostle Paul, rejoicing in 1 Corinthians 15, says, "Oh, death, where is your sting?" Where is it? There's no sting to death anymore. For Jesus took the kick out of it, and he arose from the grave. And now we too, together with him, are able to overcome our depravity. Jesus comes to give us this gift of strength to overcome our depravity. Thirdly, Isaiah calls him the everlasting Father. This is interesting because when we look at our life, we are nothing but everlasting. We are nothing but eternal. Jesus comes to bring us the gift of eternity, to overcome our human fragility. Jesus has come with wisdom to overcome our stupidity. He has come with strength to overcome our depravity. He has come with a gift of eternity to overcome our human fragility. When you're young, you think this body is quite good looking, quite strong. You don't get tired quickly. The pounds don't pack on. I'm telling you, 4 kids later, they do, guys. Watch out. They do. Why is everybody looking at me? All right. This body is quite fragile. And for those of you that have maybe a larger family or a closer family and have had to watch your parents, your aunts and uncles, your grandparents, if you've had that blessing to have them in your life. I was small. I wasn't old enough to understand. It didn't hit me until I lost my uncle, when I truly saw how fragile this life is. But yet, as human beings, we strive to live eternally. I don't know how many of you guys know about this new movement. It started in the late 90s. It's called transhumanism. It's this idea that we can merge man and machine together. And through this, we'd be able to accomplish our human weaknesses. And we'd be able just to change ourselves out. Just go basically to Jiffy Lubes and change your oil. Just go to the mechanic and you'll just change that femur. Change that heart, change that liver, and just put a new one back in. And for the last 20 years, these scientists in the transhumanist movement have become very excited about two things. One is about 5G technology, and the other is about quantum computers. Because when you merge these two technologies in one, you have the capacity in terms of a network, but you also have the capacity in terms of artificial intelligence to handle the amount of data that comes out of your body. Just think about your human body with the trillions of atoms in it. Each one has a piece of information that's transmitting all the time. You know how many petabytes of information your own body is producing right now? We can't store that much, let alone to take it and grasp all of it and to be able to talk right back to it when it's making a mistake. Well, that's what quantum computing will come and bring to us. In fact, Elon Musk, with his new company called Neuralink, is already starting to make connections into the back of your brain right here and is able to start to help people hear and see. But he cannot do that until these two pieces of technology are perfected. Why are human beings even striving to create such technology? Because they recognize their own fragility. They know this is going to end one day. But they overlook one fact. They overlook the fact that we're not just material properties. We're not just material properties. There is a spiritual dimension to us. There is a soul that you can't just upload and download into petabytes of files. The soul cannot be copied, for it is copyrighted by God himself. And he calls it the Imago Dei, the image of God, the reflection of God that is in each and every one of us. But we desire to live eternally. We desire to live eternally. And yet God has come and he says, you know what? I'm going to grant you that gift through my son Jesus. I'm going to give you eternity. But you have to turn to me. And lastly, it's the gift of peace. And this is peace to overcome our enmity. Isaiah calls him the Prince of Peace. He's the Prince of Peace. Now, why is this gift of peace important? For a couple reasons. Very first reason is, has there ever been a time in the world when there hasn't been war? We don't know of such a time. We don't know. And in fact, with all of the advancements that we want and that we've made as especially Western civilization, and even with all of our philosophical understandings, we still haven't reached the point in human history to where we can say, all right, we can put down all of our AK-47s and we can just say peace. We can just live. We have enough resources. Nobody should be fighting with each other. Let's just, make it lovey-dovey. We haven't. Why is that? You see, because we are all relational beings. And we correspond with others through relationships. Right from the beginning, God created Adam. And Adam looked around and he said, whoa, God, everybody has somebody else to talk to except for me. Nobody that looks like me around here. And God said, all right, I'll solve that problem. Surgery, let's go. And out comes the most beautiful woman in the world. She was the only one, right? She had to have been the most beautiful woman in the world. And guess what happens right after that? We don't know how long, but something other than peace happened. God comes down. Adam, where are you? Lord, I'm here, hiding somewhere. What did you do? Oh, it was the woman you gave me. After that, Adam and Eve have children. And what happened? Boom. Enmity again. Cain killing Abel. It came down to this enmity at the relationship level. But there was also an enmity at this relationship level. And this enmity between us and God, Jesus had to come and resolve. And Isaiah 53 puts it so beautifully. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. And by his stripes we are healed. Peace. Peace. In our relationship with God. And very, very militant atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote this a little over 100 years ago. And he wanted God to be dead. But as he was thinking through the logical outcomes of the fact that if God is dead, what would this world look like? He made a famous prediction in his book called Ecce Homo. And he said this: if this is going to be true, and if everybody's going to believe the notion that God is dead, then the next 100 years are going to be the bloodiest years in human history. In fact, the last 11 years of his life, he lived in and out of insanity as he was just trying to process the notion of living a life without God. And guess what has happened over the last 100 years? Over 100 million people have died in wars that had at their foundational political ideology naturalism, Darwinism, atheism. And they said there is no God. That's communism and democratic socialism. And when you add up what China, what Russia, what Germany, what Italy, what Pol Pot, what Castro in Venezuela, if you add up all of those, there's over 100 million that we can count, let alone those that have not been recorded. More than all of the people that have died and all of recorded history past. Because man without God is a man without peace in relationships. Man without God is a man without peace in relationships. Our human nature is so flawed. It's so flawed that without God, we have no peace, and this peace is exhibited through this natural outworking of conflict and of war. Think about the gift, the perfect gift for humanity that God is giving us in Jesus. Wisdom. Wisdom to be able to overcome our stupidity, our ignorance. We do not even have the ability to live a civilized society without God. Think about the strength, the gift of strength to overcome our sin and our depravity. Think about eternity. You and I desire to live forever. He alone can make that happen for you. And think about peace. Think about never having to argue or have a conflict ever again. But that first starts off by making peace with God. So I invite you tonight, if you're hearing the message of Christmas, I pray that you would take this precious gift for humanity that God is giving us, and you unwrap it, and you unwrap it, and you explore it. And the way you explore it is by reading this. And every day you take from it, you eat from it, you digest it, you study it, and you make it your lifelong thesis until you finally will get a PhD from this one day, when we will all be in heaven eternity, rejoicing with the Lamb of God there in heaven. May the Lord bless you and have a Merry Christmas. Amen.